Good morning, everyone. I'm Jean Rogers, Screen Time Program Manager here at Campaign for Commercial Free Childhood. Thank you so much, Diane. Those are big advocacy shoes for us to fill, and we're honored to be part of the ongoing story and how we help children and families. So for the past 2 years, this Action Network has gone from an idea to a coalition with almost 450 members. And whether you helped launch that initiative or you just joined by registering to be with us here today, your membership makes us the vital organization that we're becoming. Thank you for coming, many of you from far away, to explore the idea that reducing children's screen time is necessary and possible. We know that the media kids consume today will shape who they become tomorrow. But most of all, we've witnessed that the impact and the amount is increasing. When we began a dream of a more connected community around children and media, we weren't even sure it was needed. But even in the early meetings, we heard you loud and clear. This work felt isolating. There was a lack of vocabulary about the effects of media on children's development. And you shared over and over again that you want to be able to talk with parents confidently, without reservation and without judgment, about how screen use benefits children's healthy development, about how screen use is impacting children's healthy development. Oh, sorry. Freudian slip. But we know that you needed others that feel the same way, that you said you needed partnerships and collaborations to make a bigger impact and have a broader reach in your work. So, in the words of our advisory board member, Jean Rystrom, everyone comes to this issue with a different lens. We've either dealt with childhood obesity, low academic performance, social emotional issues, vision problems, sleep, attention problems, just to name a few. And here at CCFC, our issue of commercialism is almost invisible. As you'll hear from multiple presenters, it makes its insidious way into devices, games, apps, and even children's play. By coming together here, listening to experts, and sharing your experience, we're committed to widening that lens. Thanks also to Jean for studying our membership early on and providing us with these details about who we are and where we're located. Members have said that they want to work together locally to reinforce community and school efforts. But you don't know who's there. You don't know who's working on these efforts around you. So the goal may be to develop legislation, like our CCFC partner Cindy Eckert in Maryland, parent advocate who is instrumental in shepherding the first in the nation bill to impose medically sound guidelines on the use of screens in schools. As you may know, that bill is awaiting signature of Governor Larry Hogan, and if it becomes law, it'll be a model for other states to follow. Perhaps the goal is supporting awareness for parents in culturally diverse communities, or just getting parents to show up for workshops. We all know how hard that is. Our friends at Families Managing Media do it really well, so we'd like to learn from them. And then let's look at who we are. We're teachers, we're coaches, we're doctors, we're researchers, advocates, and parents. When it comes to children's screen time, the network is ready to support us all in creating much needed and long overdue solutions to excessive screen use. The Network Resource Bank is a repository for high quality, ready to use tools. It's also a place where we share what we've been creating. And I've been so impressed by the generosity of spirit that when you've created something, you wanted to share it with others that may not have the resources or capacity to do so. So thank you for contributing, and please continue to contribute to the Resource Bank. The more we contribute, the stronger and more resilient we all become for this work. So we know the schedule for the next 2 days is packed. We hope you'll use this time to connect formally and informally, so we hope we provided both of those opportunities. Lunch discussion groups taking place today. Those will be information sessions with leaders who've done pivotal work in these areas of language literacy and family media management. So join one, contribute, and explore the possibilities of next steps in this work. Tomorrow, get ready to roll up your sleeves by joining a working group. Working groups are designed to lay the groundwork for future collaborations among those of us who have common interests or common professions and who would like to lead post-conference work together. After the conference, we'll follow up with those working groups. We'll create listservs, working group members, check in regularly, and provide support for that collaboration. When appropriate, we can share those projects with the wider network and inspire duplicate efforts. So there's plenty of space also to create your own discussion group or your own working group. Just check in with us, we'll help you find the space and help you get it rolling. Our hope and part for this conference is to find and connect those people who have the time and energy to collaborate and to expand the individual work we've been doing on screen time issues. We're thrilled to have each and every one of you here today. Now, just a few housekeeping tips before I introduce our keynote speaker. I don't have to say too much to this group about connecting face-to-face. That's the reason we're here today. So please take the opportunity to be face-to-face and limit your use of cell phones and devices during the conference. Many of us, myself included, have been referencing each other's research, working together online via Google Docs, and this is a great opportunity to talk, to work together. So we encourage you to limit those. We'll be recording the keynote speakers and some of the breakout sessions, so those will be available. As you see on the schedule, we have some amazing keynote speakers, and in the interest of time, we're not able to do a Q&A immediately after each presentation, but as you'll see, we've structured the next 2 days so that for each keynote, there is a corresponding breakout session, discussion group, or working group. So there'll be opportunities for engagement. Just jot down those questions and you'll be able to address the speakers later on. So settle in and enjoy. Welcome. Now it's my privilege to introduce our first keynote speaker, Network Advisory Board member and longtime friend of CCFC, Dr. Doug Gentile. He's a person whose passion, knowledge, and research on children and media will set the stage for our essential work that we're planning to do here. Dr. Gentile is head of the Media Research Lab at Iowa State University, where he conducts scientific research on the effects of media on children, adolescents, and adults, including topics such as media violence, educational media, video games, advertising, media ratings, and technology addictions. He received his doctorate in child psychology from the Institute of Child Development at the University of Minnesota. Prior to his work at Iowa State, he was director of research for the National Institute on Media and the Family. He's been featured on National Public Radio's Morning Edition, On Point, and in hundreds of newspaper and television performances. My personal favorite is the Science Channel's Their Brain on Video Games. Mention that to him. He's the creator of the radio show The Science of Parenting. Please welcome Dr. Doug Gentile.
Well, thank you for all being here. I'm surprisingly nervous. I don't get nervous, but today I am. I think it's the energy being with so many people that actually are making a difference in your communities. So, if you want to know my potential connections, there they are. What's this kid looking at? He's watching this music video right now. So even at 7 months of age, we learn from television, we learn from what we're watching. Now, everyone has opinions about how the media might influence children, either for good or for ill. My position is that not all these opinions are equally valid. And science can actually give us real answers. So I've been asked to tell you everything I know in 40 minutes. Which, if you ask my ex-wife, plenty of time. Now, as Dr. Levin mentioned, if we want to understand where children learn their values, where they learn their patterns of behavior, what's normative and acceptable, there are a number of spheres of influence around you. And certainly the closest into them is the family. And the norms of the family influence all of the individuals in those families. Outside of this level is the level of community. And the norms of the communities influence the families within them, also influence the individuals in those families. Outside of that level is the level of society. And the norms of society influence the communities, the families, and the individuals in those families. And it's at this level that the media are operating. So the media are influencing us, not just one-on-one when we're watching it, but they're also influencing us by affecting our families. They're also influencing us by affecting our communities. And that's why it's actually hard for people to notice when they've been affected, because we all assume it's a simple one-to-one direct relationship. But in fact, we're being influenced in multiple directions at once. And this is why, I won't do it with this group, but it's fun to go to a group of parents and say, how many of you think advertisements affect people a lot? And all hands go up. And then how many of you think they affect you a lot? And those hands come right back down. Or how many of you think media violence affects kids a lot? How many of you think it affects your kids a lot? Those can't both be true, right? You can't affect people in general, but not you. You are people in general. But the honest thing here is it's hard to notice when we've been influenced ourselves. It is actually easier to see other people's kids being affected than ours. Now, I'll tell you a story, many of you probably know this, but in Mexico in the 1970s, there was a terrible problem with adult illiteracy. Too many adults couldn't read. The government realized that if they wanted their economy to grow, they had to change that. So they instituted what were at the times really innovative programs. They put adult literacy programs right in the workplace, for example, so you could go before work or on your lunch break or after work. They provided childcare in many cases. As you know, very important if you want low-skilled people to gain a new skill, you have to take care of their kids so they can do it. They provided monetary incentives in some cases. Usually a powerful incentive for people, right? Well, no one went. Okay, why not? Well, it wasn't cool to admit I can't read, right? No one wanted to be seen walking in that door. So the producer of the most popular soap opera in Mexico, Miguel Sabido, decided to try a little experiment. Here's what he did. For 6 months, he wove pro-adult literacy messages into his soap opera. In the year following that little experiment, adult literacy enrollments went up 800%. There's the power of the media. It can change the culture from it's not cool to admit I can't read to it's cool to say I can't read, I'm going to go do something about it. So let's start with a few basic statistics. 99% of American households have TV sets. That's more than have running water. The average household has 2.9, that's exactly how many I've got. Got this little 9-inch black and white TV, I figured only counts as 0.9, but then I got the 50-inch screen. That's 1.4T. I have to work out the math. But when you look in houses with kids, the average household with kids has 4 TVs, 3 VCRs, 1 digital video recorder, 2 CD tape players, 2 video game consoles, and 2 computers with an internet connection. Kids are much more surrounded by media than ever before in human history. And when you look in their bedrooms, 30% of babies have TVs in their bedrooms. 40% of preschoolers have TVs, and over 2/3 of 8 and up have TVs in their bedrooms. Now, developmental psychologists love to come up with technical jargon to describe psychological phenomena. We have a very specific word to describe this. This is what's known in developmental psychology as a bad idea. That sounds like an opinion, doesn't it? Right? He said, I don't believe in the opinions, I want data. So I'll give you some data in a minute. When we look at how kids are spending their time, the average American school-age child spends half an hour a week actively engaged one-on-one with his or her father. That's not just in the same room, that's engaged in some activity or dialogue The average American school-age child spends 2.5 hours a week actively engaged one-on-one with the mother, 4 hours a week doing homework, a half-hour a week doing non-school related reading, and that may be a generous number. 10 hours a week on the computer, not for school purposes, 13 hours a week playing video games, and TV is back up over 30 hours and 31 hours a week. Now, I have no doubt parents matter. They're not getting equal time. They're not getting anything close to it. You add these up, that's 54 hours a week the average kid's in front of a screen. That's a full-time job, and 14 hours of overtime, the average kid's in front of a screen. And that's the average kid. That means half are more than that. Now, what's really changed in the past decade is about a third of the time they're on one screen, they're also on another. So, little pseudo-experiment. This is actually the room that I do lecture in for Psych 101 at Iowa State. We pack about 400 people in here. And you might be able to see there, but people, kids put their phones, I tell them all, turn them off, put them away, but they don't, they just put them down. And so then I asked them, how often do they check the text messages or look at social media during class? And the scale went from never to maybe, sometimes in some classes, but not always, to maybe once per class, up to like a couple of times per class, right? So I'm not saying they're sitting there ignoring me, just watching YouTube videos the whole class, right? They're still listening to me, they see that the screen hasn't changed, they glance down, they look at their phone. They're not missing anything, right? They can still hear what's going on. You correlate with their grades. The average kid who never does it is getting a B. If they do it just a couple of times per class, you notch it down 2 grades. Wow. You think you're not missing anything just by glancing at it. 2 letter grades is what they're missing. Now, I claimed that having a TV in the bedroom was a bad idea. On what basis do I make that claim? Well, if kids have a TV in the bedroom, you can tack on another 5.5 hours per week up to the TV number. That's by parent report. Parents underestimate how much their kids are watching screens. When you ask the kids, it's 8 hours more. You take the video game number, double it. Parents are less able to monitor what their children see here if there's a screen in the bedroom. Parents are less able to have consistent rules for children's media use if there's a TV in the bedroom. Children participate in fewer alternative activities to electronic media, so they go to the library less, they read less, they play fewer games, they have fewer hobbies, they play fewer sports if there's a TV in the bedroom. Now, maybe you don't care too much about all those. Here's one you will care about. They get worse grades if there's a TV in the bedroom, and the risk of obesity goes up 31%, just by virtue of putting that box in the bedroom. That's on top of the 6% your risk of obesity goes up for every hour a day that you're in front of the screen. Every parent is going to be faced with this question. Every parent is going to be begged to have television or a video game system or the iPad or their cell phone in their bedroom. There's a simple 2-letter answer in the English language. What is it? No. No, that is the correct answer. Now, people are always saying, and we've actually already heard the echoes of this in here, that things are so much worse nowadays, right? I'm always skeptical the minute anyone says that. So I went back and looked at data. 1950, there were 168 hours in the week. That hasn't changed. Thank God we have and if we assume, and this isn't really a correct assumption, but if we assume that kids in general have been getting a little too little sleep, 7 hours a night, and take all their personal care, eating, bathing, etc., 3 hours a day, and then school's about 30 hours a week. That left in 1950 about 68 hours a week to do all sorts of other things, from going to church, to having hobbies, to playing with friends, to spending time with family, reading, music lessons, sports, whatever it is you wanted to do, it has to fit into that time, right? And in 1950, that's how much time kids had. By 1980, TV was at 14 hours a week. It's now up to 31 hours a week. And video games up to 13 hours a week, computer 10 hours. That means the average American school-age child has 14 hours a week to do anything of value. Yeah, it really has changed. And again, that's the average. That means half have less. Now, I'm going to summarize many bodies of research. I'm not going to bore you with theory when I could do it with data. Media violence, for example, is one of the most studied things in psychology. We have known the answer for 40-some years. And there are lots of ways you can slice and dice it, but I like thinking about 4 main effects of viewing violence in mass media. The first one's called the aggressor effect. The idea is that the more entertainment violence you watch, the more willing you become to behave aggressively when provoked, say unkind things, so you get meaner. The second is the victim effect. The idea here is that the more entertainment violence you watch, the more scared you get. The more you see the world as a scary place. It's sometimes called the mean world effect. You start initiating more self-protective behaviors like carrying guns to school, which ironically just increases your odds of getting shot. The third effect is the bystander effect. Simply put, the more you watch, the more desensitized you become. Now, I don't just mean desensitized to other media violence, although that's true. It also desensitizes us to violence in the real world. Classic study, for example, had college-age men randomly assigned to watch either 20 minutes, I think it was of a sports program, or 20 minutes of a movie that included a simulated rape scene, and then they brought in a woman who had really been raped. And the men who watched the movie with the simulated rape scene were much more empathetic to her, much less empathetic to her real human suffering pain. 20 minutes changed the way they interacted with another human being. That scares me. And the fourth effect is the appetite effect. Simply put, the more you watch, the more you want to watch. There is really no debate in scientific psychology about these issues. The issue is not, is there an effect? The question is much more interesting than that. It's what type of kid is going to get which of these more. In general, boys get more the aggressor, bystander, and appetite. Girls get more the victim. But no one is unscathed. Here's the Hollywood executive. These kids gunning down other kids in their schools could desensitize visit some of our movies. And I'm proud to say that my 17-year-old is walking out of school today. So she is part of that protest. Don't applaud for me. That's her. She's got the social conscience to do it, so I'm glad for that. Now, what about the opposite side, right? Because all these promises that media companies make, that are all the benefits, they're actually true. There can be all those benefits. So what if instead of watching violent shows and movies and video games, what if you watch pro-social shows where you care about each other's feelings, you take care of other people? It turns out there are 2 main effects of that type of programming. First of all is a pro-social effect, where these kids now show increased helpful and cooperative behaviors, and correspondingly there's an anti-violence effect, where they show decreased aggressive behaviors. And once again, this is not just right after watching it, although that's true, but the kids who watch this type of programming at home should act this way at school the next day, even though they didn't just turn it off. Now, what if you put these 2 ideas together? For example, superheroes. We'll say Batman. Batman who does violent things for pro-social ends. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, for young kids, by which I mean up to about age 7 or 8, if you show them shows with only pro-social acts and then turn them loose in the room and just count their behaviors with other kids, how many helpful behaviors, how many hurtful behaviors, they exhibit more helpful behaviors than hurtful ones. Makes sense, right? If instead you show them shows with only aggressive acts and turn them loose in the room, then they show about equal numbers of helpful and hurtful behaviors. But if you show them shows with both aggressive and pro-social acts, then they exhibit more hurtful behaviors than helpful ones. Why? Well, this is a complicated mixed message, right? Let me simplify it for you to the best it can be simplified. Here's the idea of Batman. We socially sanction Batman's limited act of aggression on this alleged criminal perpetrator because by removing the alleged criminal perpetrator from society, we reduce a greater number of aggressive acts either across time or across a wider number of people, and so that's why we socially sanction Batman's limited act of vigilante aggression. That's the simplest it gets. Little kids can't do that. Little kids understand Batman is good, Batman hits people, therefore hitting people is good if you're the good guy. We all think we're the good guy. The 9/11 terrorists think they're the good guys too, right? Now once you get to about age 8, kids can start understanding that more complicated mixed message. But this shows us where parents make a basic mistake. And I don't like blaming parents because I think every parent wants the best for the kid, every parent is trying to do the best for the kid. They just don't always know what that is. And this is one of those places where because we have advanced cognitive skills, we look at the show and we say, oh, what a good message it has, right? The bad guy goes to jail at the end. Young kids they don't understand plot. They're great studies that take shows, chop them up, randomly reorder them. Kids don't tell the difference. They have no idea how the end of the show relates to the middle or the beginning, and they cannot do that cognitively advanced thing you do, where you rewrap what you learned later, what you learned earlier in the show with what you learned later, and understand how now it's, the story's different, right? They cannot do that. And so we make our choices what's okay for them to watch. With our advanced cognitive skills, that is wrong. And so we show them a lot of stuff they shouldn't see, because what do they learn? If it's a half-hour show, they get 28 minutes of fighting is exciting, and 2 minutes of, oh, maybe it was bad. What did they learn? They cannot use that 2 minutes to rewrap the first 28. So at a ratio of 28 to 2, fighting is good. So let me show you
We want you to understand tonight that
little pseudo-experiment we did when I was director of research at the National Institute on Media and the Family.
as a children, and more importantly, in the minds of children, television is always actively teaching something. Always. To prove the point, we brought our television to the Blue Laws Daycare Center. About 10 kids, mostly 2 to 5 years old. And over 2 days, we watched them watch us.
Can I say okay?
We wanted to see if different kinds of programs would get kids to act in different kinds of ways. We had the room rigged, so while they were watching the monitor was watching them. We had cameras and plants, toy boxes, and on the other side of that one-way viewer over there. All these cameras sent pictures to TV screens upstairs, where we sat with their parents and David Walsh, a psychologist, who also runs the National Institute for Media and the Family.
It's at the age that these kids are that they're like sponges. They're learning constantly. All day long they're learning.
On the first day, we had the kids watch Barney, the popular public television program with the big purple dinosaur.
Are you ready for the next letter?
The target 2 to 5 age group is drawn in through completely. They sing the songs, and found them literally marching to the beat of this drum.
When those kids started dancing, most of the kids in the group jumped to their feet and started directly imitating what they were seeing.
Teresa's daughter, Hannah, is one way over the top about Barney.
She knows all the names. It's kind of like she gets
So she becomes part of that.
She becomes part of the group.
The kids carry the themes over after the show, playing together peacefully.
I'm popular. Yeah, I think that's really good. Everything well. Oh, just wait till you see.
On day 2, it's the Power Rangers. Popular teen bopper superheroes doing good by feeding the living daylights out of anyone doing bad. Starts out calm, even scaring some of the kids in the corner first. But in minutes, it's become something else altogether. Kids want to be like the Power Rangers so much, they start early, taking dibs on which one best represents them. You might expect kids to act differently, given these 2 shows, but would you really expect this?
They hurt each other. You don't want to touch your nose.
Early on in the show, before all of the action scenes started, they were sitting in a circle, really paying attention. Once the sustained fighting started, that circle was pretty much completely disintegrated.
Oh my goodness. I thought my son was afraid of this movie, and now he's doing the action figure motions.
Remember, here are the kids with Barney, and here are the kids with the Power Rangers.
Actually, it's more than what I expected from the other kids, but my daughter is what I expected. She's really not, she's not responding at all.
Teresa knows her daughter. She's quite suspicious about the suggestion a simple one-time exposure to a TV program could seriously influence the child she knows so well. She found out she just had to wait a little longer.
That's what they say. The first time I've ever seen that.
That sweet little Hannah was within minutes.
My scared little Hannah.
I'm shocked. I knew that they would get up and be active, but I had no idea it was going to be like this. No idea.
This is not my child today. He's not my child.
There's some good parents here, it's not gonna and so just flat out disturb it.
How are you going to get bug burn on your face
I
again?
just feel very nervous that he's reacting this way, that he can react this way so easily to something that he's seen for 20 minutes.
David Walsh argues these kinds of scenes are proof positive. Kids learn from television.
There are studies that show that babies as young as 14 months old will imitate what they see on the television screen. And so it starts early.
Don't someone's content as they were yesterday.
He's not respecting each other.
The thing that we need to remember as parents is that even though the goal isn't to teach, our kids are learning because they've always learned.
Now, there are two things that fascinate me about this. The first is the use of the word again in the sentence, Carl. You're going to get rug burn on your face again. And second, little Hannah. Why did little Hannah start punching and kicking? Did TV make little Hannah start punching and kicking? No? Okay. What did? The other kids, okay? What made the other kids start punching and kicking? TV. This is one of those rare opportunities you actually get to see the multiple layers of the effect at work. For most of the kids, it was a simple, direct one-to-one. They saw it, they started copying it. But not little Hannah. What influenced her was her community changed. One day, what was acceptable normative behavior in that room was sharing, caring, polite, respectful behavior. The next day was punching, kicking, aggressive play. What changed the norm of the room? TV. And that was powerful enough to bring everyone along with it. This also teaches us something valuable about the nature of peer pressure, because we often ask things, and why do kids smoke? And we go, peer pressure. And we stand back smugly as if we've said something important. That doesn't answer the question at all. Where did the peers get the idea? Because I promise you, with smoking, no peer came up with the idea of growing tobacco, drying it, processing it, infusing with chemicals, wrapping it in paper, lighting it on fire, inhaling the smoke and thinking that's cool. No peer came up with that idea. Where did they get the idea it was cool? And many times when you ask that question, you're back to media. So from now on, if you ever hear yourselves utter the words peer pressure, I want you to kick yourselves and go one step farther. Then where did the peers get it? Now, a lot of the newer research has been on violent video games. This is a study we did with 607 8th and 9th graders. And we found that kids who play more violent video games, they see the world more in terms of hostility. That's what hostile attribution bias means. We all know people who, when something annoying happens, they can let it roll off their back, give the other person the benefit of the doubt. We also know people who take everything very personally. This is more like that second one, that you have a bias for attributing hostility to other people's actions. And kids who play more violent video games get in more arguments with teachers. There's a real-world antisocial behavior. You get in more physical fights. There's a real-world aggressive behavior. And they get worse grades. Now, if you're a good skeptic, and I want you to be, you're going to say, Doug, that's not necessarily about playing violent video games. That might be about being a naturally hostile and aggressive kid, because naturally hostile kids see the world in terms of hostility. They get more arguments, they get more fights, they get worse grades, and they play more violent video games. That's all true. So in this study, we measured children's personality trait hostility. And if you take the lowest quartile, the 25% least naturally aggressive kids, and they also play the lowest quartile amount of violent video games, only 4% of them have been involved in a physical fight in the past year. That makes sense, right? They're not naturally aggressive, they're not playing violent games, they're not getting in fights. But if you take these same low aggression kids, but they play a lot of violent video games, it's an almost 10 times increase in their risk of getting into a fight. What about the other extreme? Let's take the 25% most naturally hostile kids. These are the ones you would expect to get into fights, right? If they don't play violent video games, 28% of them have been involved in a fight in the past year, and if they do, it's a bad combination. Now what we're seeing here is the stacking of risk factors. Yes, hostility matters. Yes, violent games matter. What matters more than either one is having them both. But what really fascinates me is these two middle bars. Notice the least naturally aggressive kids are more likely to get into fights than the most naturally aggressive kids if these ones play violent video games and those don't. Now in this study, we separated out amount of play, so the screen time part, from the content part, whether they're playing violent games. And we see that if they're spending a lot of time playing games, then they're getting worse grades. But because kids who play a lot tend to play more violent video games, those come together to increase their personality trait hostility, which in turn is related to all three of those outcome variables. But over and above that mediated pathway through trait hostility, if they're playing violent video games, that gives extra predictive power to whether they get into physical fights. Parents tend to care about one of two things: how much time their kids are with the media or what the content is. Data like this show that both matter, but they matter for different reasons. Summarizing across thousands of studies, amount seems to be related to things like school performance, attention deficit problems, physical health, risk of addiction, but not behavior. Whereas behavior seems to be related to content. So we've already seen some of the pro-social and violent things. So pro-social content relates to pro-social behavior, and aggressive content relates to aggressive behavior. The good news in this study was that kids who said their parents always check the ratings before allowing them to rent or buy games, those kids got into fewer fights and getting better grades in school. Again, if you're a good skeptic, you're going to say, Doug, that's not necessarily about checking ratings on a box, that's about being a more involved, better parent. My answer, I don't care. Because you can't just tell parents, be better. You have to tell them how. You have to give them specifics. Here's a very specific. There's a rating on the box. Learn it, use it, because it matters. Now, I show you this to prove I'm smart. These are longitudinal latent growth curves. This is 3,000 kids we followed for 3 years. And the I is the intercept, where they start the study, at the beginning of the study. The S is the slope, how they change over the 3 years. And we measured their violent video game exposure and 3 types of regressive cognition. One was hostile attribution bias, you've already heard about. The second is what's called normative beliefs about aggression. This is how acceptable you think it is to respond aggressively when provoked. And again, we all know people who, when provoked, they're not going, if they got hit, they're not going to hit back. We also know other people who think you should hit back harder. Right? This is more that second side. And the third type of aggressive cognition is aggressive fantasies. How much time you spend thinking about how much you would like to hurt other people. Are we out of battery? Maybe that's... Okay. Now, playing a violent video game, you're practicing all of these, right? You're hyper-vigilant for something to jump out at you. So you're practicing being vigilant for aggression. That's related to hostile attribution bias. Because when you see something that's an aggressive provocation, you have to call to mind a response in a violent video game. Usually you're going to choose an aggressive response. And then if you're good at it, you're going to get rewarded for it. So that actually is training you that it's acceptable, in fact preferable, to respond aggressively to a provocation. And of course, the whole time you're playing, you are practicing aggressive fantasies. So what we find is that kids who start the study playing more violent video games also start off with all 3 of those, more of those types of aggressive cognitions. If they change across the 3 years to playing more violent video games, they change all 3 of those types of aggressive cognitions. And of course, what you think and how you spend your time seeing the world predicts their actual physical aggression at the end of the study. Now, what fascinates me about this is where we can actually see what's going on. Imagine that kid in the school hallway after playing a couple of years of violent video games. He gets bumped in the hall. Because he's practiced being vigilant for aggression, he stops assuming it was an accident. He starts assuming the kid meant to do that, meant to make me mad, right? So another thing you practice, quickly reorient your attention and call to mind your response. Now the thing people tend to do is usually the first thing that comes to mind. The first thing that comes to mind is the thing you've practiced the most. It's called the availability heuristic. I told you love having terms for everything. Now, if you play lots of violent video games, you have practiced an aggressive response to a provocation thousands and thousands and thousands of times. So that's what's going to come to mind first. Now, you might say, okay, should I do it? Well, you've also been reinforced and rewarded for doing it. That lowers the bar to make it seem like you should do it. And you can now see how the odds have changed just a little bit. That this kid might now say something unkind or push back. If he does, then the odds that this turns into a full-blown aggressive encounter skyrocket. Here's the fascinating thing. When that fight happens in that school hallway, it looks nothing like what they were practicing in the games. Kids are not copying the aggression in the games. That's not how this effect works. It changed the way you change. Playing games changes the way you perceive the world and think, and you carry that with you everywhere. And that's where this whole national dialogue on violent video games has gone totally wrong, is because no one understands we're not talking about copying. Show you another little pseudo-experiment I got to do with Super Nanny.
Boys are still in two groups. 20 are playing a violent war game, and the other 20 a non-violent football game.
So these boys are playing their video games. Out in a room, about to interview some of those kids. I want to sneak around there and take a look myself.
Joe will observe while Doug interviews a random sample from each group.
So we've got dogs sitting down waiting.
Each boy will be asked a series of questions. During the interview, Doug will intentionally knock a couple of pens over to see how the players respond. Will the violent players react in the same way as the non-violent players? The first candidate for interview is one of the non-violent football games.
I'm back. Have a seat. Just have a couple of questions for you right now. I might not even know what to later on. But do you play games at your home?
Yeah,
Yeah. What game systems do you have?
just PS2.
And what would you say are your 3 favorite games? Sure.
Doug's theory is that the non-violent games will help, but the violent games won't. Joe is not so sure.
See, when the dog went to go and come off, then the politeness kicked in and he said, "I've got my hand." There wasn't an immediate reaction. And I think purely that was because he's a polite boy. I don't think it was because he played football. I'm not quite convinced yet.
So what happens with a boy who played the violent war game?
What are your 3 very favorites?
And another.
And what would you say are your 3 very favorite games? Along weird, just 3 favorite to play.
And another violent gamer.
3 favorite games.
Didn't even budge, he looked.
All 3 violent gamers have not offered to help. But what about the non-violent game players? And another.
And what would you say are your 3 favorite games?
So far, all 4 non-violent gamers have volunteered to pick up the pens. But what if we go back to the violent games?
So I think he gave less a reaction than anyone else did.
Overall, only 40% of the violent gamers picked up the pens. But an incredible 80% of the non-violent gamers have all stepped in to help Doug. It's a simple and revealing test with shocking results.
So the important question, goatee or not? What should I do? As you saw, 80% of the non-violent gamers helped, and when they picked up more than even when the violent gamers did help, they picked up fewer. So they were less helpful. So again, we only talk about media violence in this country when there's been a horrible tragedy like a school shooting, which is exactly the wrong time to talk about it because it makes it so extreme. This effect is much more subtle, as you can see. Playing the violent games just makes you a little less helpful and caring. Now, what about if they were playing pro-social games? So we've done these types of studies now in several countries. We've done correlational, longitudinal, experimental studies. We find that when people play the pro-social game, they are more helpful and less hurtful. When they play the violent game, they are more hurtful, less helpful. We've now replicated that in East Asia, Western countries, East European countries. We also are finding that part of the reason it has this effect is that when they consume more pro-social media, they gain in empathy. And that's what drives their helpful and cooperative behaviors. And another area of research we've been I've been starting to look at is video game and internet addiction, which I came to very skeptically because I did my first study on it in '99. Because even back in the '90s, parents were claiming their kids were addicted to games, and I thought that can't be true. Because I think they don't understand what the word addiction means. Addiction does not mean do something a lot. It means do it in a way that is dysfunctional, damages your life. And I thought, that's not what's happening. Turns out I was wrong. When you study it with this clinical lens, you actually find across many countries now, in the US, we did a national study with Harris polls, so beautiful national data the kind psychologists never get to have, of 1,100 kids nationally represented all across America. 8.5% of the gamers, 92% of kids game, 8.5% of them would be classified as addicted by this clinical definition. How do you know your research is making an impact? When Jimmy Fallon talks about it, he said a new study shows that about 1 out of every 10 kids who plays video games is addicted. You know what they really need is rehab. That we have such an awesome game. It's on Xbox and PlayStation. We played it for 6 hours yesterday. 6 hours, sissy. These addicted gamers go way past that. Now, the American Psychiatric Association put in the DSM-5 in the appendix internet gaming disorder. They said it's 9 symptoms to try to identify it. If you say yes to 5 or more, then you're in the club. I'm just going to zip through these, so if you want to see them in detail, take a picture or talk to me later. But they are standard types of addiction things. You have cognitive salience, you have withdrawal symptoms when you try to cut back, that you need more and more, that you try to cut back but you can't, you have loss of control, that you start sacrificing other activities in your life for the gaming, that even when there are serious problems, you don't stop. You are deceiving people about how much you're playing to escape dysphoric moods, and that you may be actually damaging your long-term life by risking relationships or educational or occupational opportunities. Again, 3,000 kids studied for 3 years. 5 of 9 symptoms is the cutoff. So some of the kids started the study above that level and ended below it. So they stopped being addicted. Some of the kids started below but became addicted. Some of the kids stayed addicted, and most of the kids never were. This allows us to actually start disentangling what comes first. What is chicken and egg in this? Because you might imagine that maybe the gaming is a symptom of another problem. The kid's depressed, doesn't have a lot of friends, isn't doing well at school, goes home and games as a way of coping, which is a very typical use of media, is we use it as a coping strategy. But like coping in other substance addictions, often that's an etiological risk factor for becoming addicted. That you go home, have a drink to take the edge off, nothing wrong with that, until you do it tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day, and at some point it controls you. So dysregulated coping is actually one of the etiological pathways, and we've got some new data showing that that does seem to be related for video game addiction. But you can imagine maybe it's really just a symptom of some other problem. And what we found is exactly the opposite, that in the first year, what predicts who becomes a pathological gamer, if they're more impulsive, if they have lower social competence, and if they're spending more time playing games, and then they have more addiction symptoms. And at the end of the study, if they became addicted, their depression increases, their anxiety increases, their social phobias increase, their grades get worse. If they stop being addicted, you see the opposite pattern. So it looks like the addiction is leading these other problems. I actually believe what we're seeing here is true comorbidity. And as you know, with most mental health things, once you get one problem, you get others, and they push each other around. So you can't just focus on only the depression or the video gaming. You've got to be dealing with both, because they're going to actually influence each other. But will they get help? In other studies, we've shown the more media you consume, the less willing you are to go get help, because there's more stigma attached to mental health. So can I predict the future? Well, sadly, I can. Playing violent video games increases aggressive cognitions, which in turn increases aggressive behaviors. Playing pro-social games or watching pro-social TV or movies increases empathy, which in turn predicts increases in helpful cooperative behaviors. Playing in a way that harms your functioning, harms your functioning. It's not brain science. Oh wait, yes it is. And we've known this for thousands of years. Your grandmother was a great neuroscientist. She told you practice makes perfect. She was right, actually. What we know more technically correct for modern neuroscience is practice makes permanent. Perfect practice makes perfect. So if you practice something badly, you get really good at doing it badly. One of the newest studies that is very related to this group is we've known for a long time that kids having bedroom media is related to some of these other outcomes, higher risk of obesity, lower grades. There's some new research on increased gaming disorder symptoms, and perhaps aggression. And these are known as the displacement hypothesis. It's not immediately apparent why having TV in the bedroom would reduce performance. Could enhance it, right? Or maybe but the idea is maybe what it's doing is it's displacing other activities, such as homework or reading or lowering the quality of sleep. And that's what's related to poorer grades. That's a really tough thing to measure, right? You're trying to say that this has an effect because something else didn't happen. There's lots of research on the content hypothesis, as you've already seen. Well, in this study, we were able to actually show that, first of all, if they have TV or video games in the bedroom, that does increase their total screen time, which is related to these outcomes, and increases their violent content, which is related to those. So that's good evidence for the displacement hypothesis. We were able, because we were looking at these large longitudinal samples, some of them with 3 waves, we actually were able to show even more displacement, that TV in the bedroom increases screen time, which relates to lower reading and less sleep, both of which are related to poorer school performance. And as you've seen in some of the other studies I showed you, more violent content increases these normative beliefs, which increases physical aggression. To my knowledge, this is the first study to directly test the displacement hypothesis, showing that TV in the bedroom, we knew from here over, you now see that this is like a turbocharger. You put that media in there, and all of the effects of media get an extra boost. What's the good news? This is a study with 1,300 families from Minnesota and Iowa. We talked to the kids, we talked to the parents, we talked to the teachers, we talked to the school nurses. We gathered a lot of information on these families. And we found that when parents set limits on the amount of media, amount and content, so they have rules for amount and content of children's media, that does immediately lower their total screen time and reduce their violent media exposure. But then if we follow them out to the end of the school year, those families where the parents set limits on amount and content of screen media, they were getting better sleep, which in turn related to lower weight gains or lower risk for obesity. They're getting better grades in school. They're showing more helpful and cooperative behaviors as rated by the teachers, which is remarkable because the teachers don't know what the rules for media are at home, but they can see the behaviors in the classroom. And lower aggressive behavior, again, is rated by teachers. Now, there are 2 things that fascinate me about this. The first one is those aren't the same type of outcome, right? That's physical health, school performance, and social wellness. And this one simple thing of setting limits on screen time and content media changes all of them. Out into the future, this creates this wide ripple that goes out across the school year. But the most interesting thing is that no parent will ever know they're having this effect, because you're not going to know that your child gained less weight than he would have. You can't know that your child is more pro-social than she would have been, or less aggressive than he would have been. You only know what your child is, and this is why parents feel powerless, because all they can see is the fight. They can't see the effect it has, so they just see the fight, and they don't know that it's having this beneficial effect. It takes someone like me who can look at it from the outside to be able to see the pattern. So parents are in a much more powerful position than they realize. And I want you to get that information into the communities you serve, that it is worth having the fight. Because it is a tremendous protective factor across the wide range of health and wellness indicators. Thank you very much.